Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, hello and welcome to the Ascension Reformed podcast. Pastor Zach here with you. I'm the pastor of Ascension Reformed Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm here with an old friend of mine, Isaac Ferrell from the Trinity Presbyterian Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So, Isaac, thank you for joining us on this week's episode.
Great to be here, Zach. I appreciate it so much for inviting me on.
Most definitely. Thanks for taking some time out for us. As we get started here, it's probably worth noting for everybody that Isaac has some background with our church, and there might be some points in our conversation where he refers to us as Westside Reformed. It'll be totally understandable if you do that, but he was back with us way back when. And so, Isaac, would you mind just telling us about some of your background with our church and what your labors were way back when?
Absolutely. Yeah. I often would describe my history with Ascension as being there almost at its beginning, mainly because Zach and I we got to meet from in seminary. He was the older guy who was far cooler than me, and I was the young dewy-eyed freshman who showed up and wanted to hang out with all the older guys. And lo and behold, I run into this guy who's planting a church in Cincinnati, and he's spending weekends and summers and things of that sort, going off and planting. And as time went on, I disappear, or he disappears, and I show up at school wondering where Zach has gone, and he calls me up and says, "Hey, listen, we might be needing an intern at some point." And right around then, it was 2014. We started talking about it. He came and visited Westminster West one more time. We had a sit down to talk about the possibility of me coming out for a summer, and I gladly accepted. My wife and I and our dog were more than excited to come out to Cincinnati, fly out. And that was summer of 2015, I think. And yeah, there was a lot of fun things that we did that summer, from going to a few different what is the phrase? Excuse me.
Summer festivals, probably one of the big ones.
But there were also meetings throughout the city that was going on. Big thing. I showed up and Pastor Zach was quick to say, "Hey, listen, people get together a lot, especially during the summer. There's fish fries. There's all these things. We got to find ways to get connected to them." And so the festivals were a big process. But on top of that, we also we would spend Sunday evenings going over to Harrison and having a Sunday evening service. I was thoroughly impressed because, Zach, you said, "Hey, I'm going to be preaching through Revelation this summer." And I was like, "In the summer, 3 months, you're going to get through Revelation?" He's like, "Yeah, we're going to do it." And so we drive the 30 minutes over to Harrison. We get a service going. We have Zach preach through Revelation. In fact, there was one story. Tell me if you remember this. And
oh boy,
if we venture too far into memories,
boy.
There was so the big thing in this was to get out and meet people, connect people, get them connected to the church. And one instance was meeting with a woman who had a doll shop, I believe, and she was very kind, though very much interested in hearing about Revelation. And she wanted to talk about Revelation with me at extended periods of time. When I came in and said, "Hey, here's a flyer. Come out to the service here in Harrison. It'd be great." And she wanted to talk about just how the end of the world was coming very, very soon in 2015. And she said, "It's happening within the next couple years." And I was like, "You know what? It'd be great to have you come out and talk to Zach and give him your opinions." But it was wonderful, outside of that, a lot of my duties was getting to know the church, and something that I took upon myself was also to try and serve the church and serve Zach and Casey very much in their process of church planting. It's a hard thing, and to have another set of hands, especially in the early days, is really quite helpful. So being able to preach, being able to lead Sunday school, there's some stories that may or may not come up over the next little bit that are absolutely excellent, in which I still tell to this day during that summer. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yes, there are a few I tell as well, especially from that doll shop owner, where as you exited the doll shop, I snapped a convenient picture of you coming out. And
you remember the picture?
I still have that somewhere deep in the recesses of my files. So.
Oh, what a great time that was. Ooh.
Uh, but yeah, when Isaac did his internship here in 2015, it's probably worth also noting that that was part of the initiative of Classis Eastern US within the United Reformed Churches, in which our church is. The Classis is the term we use for regional assembly, and the Classis helped sponsor this church planting internship that we're discussing here. Yeah, Isaac, would you mind just maybe reflecting on some ways? So it was a church planting internship, so it was geared toward getting you some experience within a church planting context. Could you maybe share some ways that that your internship with us was an encouragement to you? You are a church planter now, and we'll talk about your church plant in just a little bit. But what were some things from your experience at Ascension Reformed, back then Westside Reformed, that was encouraging for you and helped prepare you to become a church planter?
Sure, sure. Yeah, Ascension Reformed helped form my entire perspective on church planting. I had never really been connected to a church plant before that, so it was eye-opening. It was the movement from reading about church plants into experiencing church plants, and it took it even deeper. So in the wider experience, in my perspective of church planting, people join church plants and they see small groups, they see not the big shows, the big experiences of church planting, or even of large churches, and they kind of understand it's all hands on deck. They understand it's a little bit difficult, it can be a bit wonky at times, and I expected that, and I saw it in many ways from meeting in the basement of a Roman Catholic church, which was great.
Presbyterian. Yeah, yeah.
Presbyterian was it?
Yeah, yeah.
I forgive
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
I
All
forget.
good. Don't want to get in
And
too much trouble here. I don't know.
I understand. I completely get you. It was. I just remember the bells ringing
Yes.
right as the service started, and I'm like, "Hey, that's starting us." Like, no, it's actually them meeting upstairs. Um, I remember going there, but also discussions on what's the most appropriate place to meet. When is this going to work? Where can we meet outside of it? In fact, Zach opening up his home more often than not to host the church for meals, for other things, for um, consistory meetings, all those things were all happening within the home itself. So seeing that on just a church attending piece was so helpful to know the weight of what it is to church plant. But then it took it further because I also was behind the scenes being the intern, seeing what a pastor does on a week to week basis. And I had interned prior to coming to Ascension at a church up in Washington State the year before, and I had visited churches and filled pulpits a few different times. But to see the day-to-day work of a church planter from not having a study or having a study in the home and having family just around or the dogs around and going, I can't go to a separate place. This is my place, to what is currently over Pastor Zach's shoulder right now, which is a printer used to print the bulletin, and fold the bulletin and staple the bulletin. People don't think about that. When they jump into churches, they think of like, oh, it's just there. If they have enough forethought to go, well, somebody probably put this together, they don't think the pastor does that. But in a church plant, I was like, this is what the day-to-day life is. This is us, not just in the weeds of study and writing and meeting people. You also got to change the light bulbs. You got to do the details of it. And so it was so helpful to me in preparation for my own church planting experience because I may have been overwhelmed if I had stepped into it and found myself going, I thought this was going to be less knickknacks and little small things and more big picture, big study, big moments in church planting. And it's not. It's really that hour to hour, day to day life. And I appreciate it so much. It helped me have a wider vision towards what my own eventual work in church planting was. Um, I think back on those festivals with my experience of getting out there and meeting new people. One of the festivals was the Harrison Festival, where we were trying to come up with ideas of how to connect with people. And one of them was we got to find a big can of helium because we're going to be handing out balloons for free. And it worked, because people loved free balloons and kids, and then the teenagers would come and they would start getting the balloons and they would start inhaling the helium, and then they'd start rotating, and we would go through the helium too quickly. One night, one of the busiest nights, we ran out of helium 2 hours in, and right next to us was people doing face painting for free, and they're like, "You're leaving?" And I said, "We don't have anything. We can't run out of giving everything. We're just going to look at people and wave." Uh, it was an odd thing, church planting, because you just don't think of those things. You think of big expressions, big moments, but it is those little ones that make up a truly biblical and godly church plant. I loved it.
Well, you've mentioned that you are a church planter now.
Mhm.
Would you mind giving us a brief history, the 30,000-foot view of your own work in Cedar Rapids?
Absolutely. So the story itself is very surprising and shocking. Actually, I was in the PCA. I was in the New York Metro. That's where I am. That's where I was after graduating seminary, my first position as an assistant there. And the head minister was retiring, and so he was looking to turn over all the staff. And so my contract was coming to an end, and I was looking for a possible position. And one summer, my wife and I were visiting family at a wedding in Iowa. Her family's from Cedar Rapids. And while there, we went to the local PCA church, which is in North Liberty, just south of Cedar Rapids. And the head pastor in the pastoral prayer said, "Lord, send us a church planter for Cedar Rapids." And we had no idea that there was any expectation for church planting in Cedar Rapids. The people were even interested. It's the second largest city in Iowa. And my wife and I had always thought it would be great to get a good Reformed church in this city. So we contacted the pastor. I talked to him afterwards, and he said, "You're going to have to go through the process of the PCA to get through this." And what then followed it was 3 months of just mad doing things, filling out applications, raising money. And we ended up in Georgia in September. My wife was 8 months pregnant, and we went through the assessment that the PCA does for church planting, got the approval, went back to Cedar Rapids, applied for the position, and in January of what I believe is 2019, they issued me a call to become the assistant pastor of church planting for Cedar Rapids out of Hope Evangelical Church, the PCA there. And then we made the decision going, okay, let's start collecting a group. And we got a core group together. We started making plans and started fundraising. I was working in a restaurant to do all of this process. And we set a time for the launch, and it was Easter 2020, which is an outstanding time for everyone to be planning to launch a church. 2 weeks prior to, the world shut down. And so I said, hey, let's kick it 6 months because it's going to be done. That's what everyone was saying. By the summer and fall, things would have been slowed down.
2 weeks to flatten the curve, man. You're good. Yeah.
But they told me. So I said, hey, 6 months, it'll give us time to revamp, to really push, have a summer of really outreach. And October of 2020, we launched at the building we're currently in right now. And within 1 month, we actually got kicked out because it didn't flatten the curve. It shot back up in that winter. We came back after Christmas. We had been meeting in parks, in random churches that were willing to host us in the afternoon. But from that point on, the church has existed. We've survived by word and sacrament. We continue to proclaim the gospel every Sunday. We're so glad to be there, and the Lord has blessed us miraculously, especially within the last year. We've been glad to see some pretty miraculous growth as the sole conservative Presbyterian and Reformed church in Cedar Rapids. We're this summer we've been averaging anywhere between 120 to 140 people, and it's picking up. We're gearing up for a lot come the fall, and particularization, or well, forgive me, what is the URC term again for
Organization.
Yeah, organization. I
We
met
were
with
not organized before then.
We're not organized. No,
Disorganized mess.
it is a disorganized mess. I met with a Baptist pastor here in town this morning, and he talked to me. Oh, we use the word independence. And I said, oh, that's very freedom oriented.
So what are some of the obviously there's an opportunity in Cedar Rapids, as you mentioned, that there are no other conservative Reformed denominations and churches there. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the other opportunities that you are experiencing there?
It is it's an odd thing to walk into. Um, you know, we stepped into the city and we I knew it vaguely and I was kind of approaching it as a church planter, and so I'm learning a little bit about the city each year. But by far, it is a city that is equal parts not interested in Christianity or very, very much interested in a particular flavor of Christianity. So evangelical, big church, Baptist kind of perspective. There are probably somewhere between 5 to 7 Southern Baptist churches, and one of them is the largest church with 3,000 regular attenders on Sunday to one that has 40, and it's small and conservative and kind of fundamental. Uh, so when we planted, my expectation was we're going to be weird, just straight up for either church people coming in or even non-church or ex-church people coming in. They have never seen this kind of church, and we can use that for our advantage. And that's what we emphasize. We push forward. We say, hey, we're a liturgical church. We have a call to worship because of this. We have a reading of the law, we have a confession of sin, and we have a proclamation of the gospel, declaration of peace, whatever phrase you want to use. And it has been gangbusters, so well received. People tell me regularly, "Hey Isaac, your sermon's great, but I really love the reading of the law and the gospel." I was like, "That's kind of nice." I spend considerably less time on my reading of the law and the gospel than my sermon, but I'm glad that it's so full of the gospel. I said, "Thanks. I appreciate that." I I often I'm training up elders right now because we're heading towards particularization or organization, and I say, at the very least, we need to have at least three direct moments of the gospel within the worship service, from the reading of the law and the gospel to the sermon to the Lord's Supper, right? The table. Those are three direct. Beyond that, we're hitting it all across it. And everyone has said as they've joined us that we don't hear this much gospel. We never hear the gospel this much. It's such a shock everywhere. And it's been great. But that first push, every Sunday, I start the service going, hey, listen, this place may seem a little weird to you when you walk in because it's so different from everything else in the city. But you use the weirdness for the goodness of the gospel to preach out and say, this is actually not that weird. When we baptize children, that's one that shocks just about everybody. Walk in there, and my opening statement says, listen, we're about to do something that you may have never seen before, but I'm going to tell you historically and biblically, we're actually on a better grounding than anyone else who has said anything else. So it's quite a great experience to just kind of be that first beachhead of Reformed confessional churches in the city. But this may be moving into some of the other questions you might ask, but I would say something that my time with Ascension painted such a great picture for me in church planting. I talked about our time going to Harrison for the evening service. I remember sitting down and talking with you in the room that you're sitting in right now. We're going, why are we going to Harrison? Well, because there's a possibility of us planting. There's a possibility of us doing something. Let's move on. Let's think not just here's this location, but let's go on. And my step into Cedar Rapids was exactly that. That's why I would say that it helped form so much. It wasn't just day to day, moment to moment, but to have the immediate vision, I'm going to go plant churches. And I'm not just talking about mine, but I'm going to be raising up leaders and young men and older men, whoever wants to come and plant more churches. So that's the vision I cast even when we came to Cedar Rapids, was the same one that I remember hearing in that room from you, Zach, was we're not stopping here. There's so much more time and room and place. And being the first church in Cedar Rapids, I say, hey, we could fit four more in a city that has a metro of over 250,000. We can fit four more easily.
Yep.
And not mention all the rural areas that we can expand out to, the many cities around Iowa that just don't have a strong case for confessionally reformed churches. So I really want to emphasize how much, and that's why I have an apprentice.
Yeah, sure.
We're sitting there looking at 150 people, and I'm sitting there going, I don't want any more. let's go plant. We don't need to grow larger. We need to go and expand, get more churches, get more buildings. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned Harrison. Remember that time you're offered a job in Harrison on the
I do
spot?
remember
A
that.
job at the
See
church,
that
that is, a pastoral position, that completely out of the blue as we sat there.
you do this to me. That was they said it to no, I'm gonna be clear because they said it to you first. They said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody," and you just turn your head and look at me like, "Well, like you're gonna throw me under the bus just right there in the middle of an elder meeting." Uh, that happened that summer a few times. This is the one that I was thinking of. Do you remember there was one service where I was leading the second service. There was a gentleman who had joined us. I believe to be homeless, which is what happens in church plants. You get a lot of people who are just kind of coming in. He came in halfway through the first service, and Zach had ducked him enough that he didn't have to hear the shouting back at the man who was preaching behind the pulpit. And that was going on while I was leading the Sunday school service. And here I am going through whatever section of the Heidelberg we were on at that point, and I see Zach laughing at me from the back while this man is shouting at me, giving my rhetorical questions direct answers.
You kept asking rhetorical questions, and he kept
Kept
answering
going, I
them.
did.
And what
It
did
was so
and
fun.
what did the crowd say? He yells, "Crucify him!"
It's the fun. That's right. Oh, that's a great story. Oh man.
That's excellent. The how about I mean, you've already talked a little bit about your own interest in planting more churches, and you got to see that a little bit with us in terms of our own interests from very early on, as you noted. And somewhat tangentially, it's probably worth just noting for the listeners that our church has planted a few churches, but there have also been other initiatives that we've tried to start that have just not come together. So like the Harrison one is an example of that. We thought early on, hey, we're going to give this a shot, see if we can at least pick up some maybe new visitors, new members, but let's see, maybe we can get another church plant going. Who knows? And that didn't come together. That's okay. And we've had other examples like that too, where we've just tried something to say, well, let's just see. And probably more things have not worked out than have worked out. So even though we, are very joyful to have had a role in the Indianapolis work, Madison, Florence, Kentucky with Pastor Brandon, there have been many other stories that would not be called technically a success story, but it's just a matter of like, hey, let's give it a shot and see what the Lord might bring from it, or might not. He might shut a door. But even within your own presbytery, Isaac, you kind of mentioned there was already a little bit of an interest to plant churches in Iowa, and then the Lord brought you there at the right place, the right time to find that call. And as I understand it, you're part of church planting in the broader presbytery there. Do you want to just talk about some ways that you're trying to encourage church planting in your presbytery? I'm sure there's some unique things because you're in a pretty rural part of the country. So maybe just kind of speaking to that a little bit, opportunities for rural church planting, how you're going about encouraging that within your presbytery.
Yeah. Yeah. It was when I was issued my call by Hope Evangelical Church, they asked me to do two things. One was to plant the church in Cedar Rapids, and two was to um, direct and revamp the church planting process in Iowa,
Hmm.
Iowa Presbytery in particular. So we have successfully moved towards the planting of Cedar Rapids, and now our attention is starting to expand out to the wider Iowa area. And right now there are 8 PCA churches in the Iowa Presbytery. I walked in and cast a vision to say, hey, let's double it in 10 years. See if we can get 8 more. And they have been trying and they have been working. I took on the very first church planting apprentice within the Iowa Presbytery. That's who is currently working with me, Ryan. He is from Iowa, and he grew up here. He went to Covenant Seminary, and he came back and has nothing but an interest to reach anywhere. The people of Iowa, he believes, needs a strong confessionally reformed church, and I'm thankful for him as maybe even more so than Zach was thankful for me, because I've been on the other side of things. And our aim when we talk about rural church plants, it's an interesting one because we have a few rural plants in Iowa, or a few rural churches, forgive me, but it's an interesting thing towards encouraging them, because when I have talked to pastors about how to plant off of them or how to think about doing that, it's really hard to kind of get through the tradition and get through the trust that you need to build.
Mhm.
Those are often the two categories I push when it comes to rural planting. First, you can't be too much of a new person to walk into a rural context because they won't trust you right away. It's going to be a long slog of doing that. It's easier to cut down that time if you have somebody who's like, well, I'm from Iowa, or I grew up 20 to 30 minutes from here.
Mhm.
They will have a little bit more trust in you. Not to say that it can't work for someone new coming in from wherever to make that step, but it takes longer to build in to the community as a whole. But after you get through that trust, you then have to break down some of the traditions that have already been established. There are mainline churches in every small town across America. You go there and you're going to find a Methodist church, and you're going to find a PCUSA church, and probably a Roman Catholic church. And those are going to be the three main ones that are in small town USA. And their doctrine may or may not be related to the wider denomination that they're a part of, but as a whole, it's far more connected to just what the traditions of the city are. Older people who have just said, this is the way we've done things, this is the way we are. They may not have had a pastor for over 30 years, and they just kind of existed. It becomes more community center than anything else. And to sit there and say, I'm going to go start a church in this small town means you're pushing against their tradition and you want to change everything. And that's where you have to fall back onto that trust and kind of go, listen, you've known me, you've got to know me, you know that I care about this thing, and I care about you, and you have to walk the line of upsetting their tradition and pointing them more towards the faith and saying, hey, I'm not going to succumb to your tradition so that you trust me. I'm going to succumb to the gospel and show that I care about you enough that you trust me. Therefore, you're both upsetting their tradition and gaining their trust by just grounding yourself on the gospel. Uh, and it's a hard thing. I would say, I mean, I said my Cedar Rapids is the second largest city in
Mhm.
Iowa, so it's not exactly rural, but I interact with pastors all across the state who are in rural traditions. There is one church. It's glorious. It's a church in the middle of Colfax Center Presbyterian Church, what it's called. It's the middle of kind of a Dutch contingent in the middle of central Iowa, and you turn off the highway and you see cornfields, and then you drive a mile and you take a right, and then it's cornfields, cornfields, cornfields for 3 miles, and for some reason you see a very tall building, and you get a mile in and you go, what is that? Is that a Gothic church in the middle of the and it is. That's what it is. It's got a graveyard next to it. It's got a
Mhm.
manse next to it, and then it's a Gothic church that has just country church that built up to nothing. You're like, what is this? What's going on? It's like, well, it's the community church that people from 20 miles away, they all just
Mhm.
kind of come in here. And it's that Presbyterian church that has worked. And this pastor who's just a little bit older than me, he came in a few years after me, and he is working to grow that church out of their rut of traditions that were once there into now a strong Presbyterian gospel preaching church, and it's working really well. The fact that he is in a manse means he's living there. People know it and they trust him to be working towards it. Not that there weren't bumps in the road, but he is pushing hard. So I'm starting to nudge him along and say, hey, when are you going to take on your apprentice? I got mine. You got to take on another guy so that you can plant. You got to go and plant, get more stuff. But it's a long road in the rural world. It's
Mhm.
really hard to do parachute plant. I don't know if you use that language at all, Zach, but
Sure.
to drop somebody just straight into something and go fix it. If you're thinking of parachute planting in a rural setting, go, okay, well, he's going to have to fundraise for the next 10 years because it's going to take that long to build the trust in the community to create something.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, what are, big picture wise, you're thinking about helping your presbytery and planting churches. You're, I'm sure, interacting with people across your own denomination, the PCA, with respect to church planting. What are some of the common barriers that you experience? What are some reasons that people might not want to plant churches, or that churches feel like it's not necessary? Or I don't know, what are some of the things you've come across in terms of barriers,
Yeah.
especially that local churches have toward this calling?
Yeah, I'll start local and then I'll go big. Locally, churches just don't know how to do it. That's often the first that they say, yeah, sounds like a great idea, and then they just say, what's the first step? And my encouragement to them when I have those conversations is like, have you started to pray about it yet?
Mm.
Because that's the first step. Please start praying about it because that it's in your mind, and pray about it in the congregation as well because then it's in their mind. Um, But after you start giving them some steps, giving them some guidance in what the proper step is, it becomes a bandwidth issue. As I've interacted with a number of churches, they say, well, that's just too much work.
Mm.
It's too much to do, too many things to keep in mind. My consistory is already busy enough. My elders or session, whatever phrase you want to use, are so busy with care of the church. How can we care for a whole other body to do it? And I have to, you have to push people and say, are you relying too much on your own strength, or you're relying on the strength of the Lord in which to lead you and guide you? I understand there's a difficulty in bandwidth, but uh, I often actually bring you up, Zach. At this point, I go, I know of a minister who has overwhelming things, and yet there are a number of churches that they've planted out of, and they're not even your size. They're just planting. They're doing it because they trust in the Lord to do it. And they go, well, that's them. And I say, yeah, that is them. Get to work. But I'm blunt. That's me. I'm willing to accept that title. Um, I actually have in my sermon this week, I say bluntness is not a spiritual gift, and I need to listen to it myself. It's not a spiritual gift. Um, but when you get past, I mean, there's always the financial concern when you're in rural or middle America.
Mhm.
We are probably the poorest presbytery in the PCA as a
Mhm.
whole, and this is where you get the connect from the local body to the wider denomination.
Mhm.
To go through the assessment in the PCA is costly. It's upwards of about $5,000 to fly out, to stay in a hotel, to be assessed, to pay for the assessors and all those kind of things. And local churches are going, why would I do that? Why don't we just plant? And we go, yep, I understand, because it's pricey, and that's a strong barrier. And denominationally, at least within the PCA, things have there's a great fear of being top down,
Mhm.
which is just a normal perspective in a lot of American churches. They don't want it to appear that I'm giving money to this big corporation that decides where the money goes. And so the PCA has tried to push against it and say, well, locally, presbytery wise, classis wise, that's where you raise your funds. And that can work, but what if your classis or your presbytery is super poor and they
Mhm.
can't afford to do that? Or one church in particular in the classes is the only one that wants to plant, and they're the only ones who have the money, and they're not going to go ask other churches, and then you're not working together. You just got one guy doing one thing, and it becomes this huge barrier financially, where we're really a struggle with the Iowa Presbytery, and one of the difficulties is talking to potential apprenticeships or potential pastors saying, how are you working on fundraising?
Mhm.
Have you done that? Do you know what it's like to fundraise? And they are deeply afraid of fundraising. It's one of the great fears of church planting is, how am I going to ask people for money?
Mhm.
And I've had two men who have helped me immensely when it comes to fundraising, and one is a big name in the PCA. His name's Ted Powers, and I deeply appreciate him. And he often says, "Hey, listen, they just want to get to know you, and the money's there. You can find it. You just have to ask and trust in the Lord." And the other one was a guy I went to Moody Bible Institute with. He was in my undergrad. He's a few years younger than me. He lives in the city. He was working for a nonprofit fundraising. And he said, Isaac, the win is in the ask. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you get a yes or no. The fact that you asked means something is going to happen. If you don't ask, nothing will happen. And so with my apprentice, with the potential church planters, I tell them financially it's hard, but you have to at least ask. Swallow
Mhm.
your pride, swallow your fear, trust in the Lord, and ask somebody. You'll find out you're going to get more than you even realized.
Mhm.
Does
Excellent.
that
Good stuff. Yeah, very helpful. As we kind of close up here, do you have any things that we could pray for? I mean, I know that there's a number of folks in our church who still will remember you, and others are now just getting to know you through this podcast episode. Clearly, you guys are preparing to particularize or organize with your own session of elders. Did you mention, are you training deacons as well yet, or not quite?
Not quite. That's
Okay.
our first move after we become a freestanding church.
Excellent. So we'll praying for those things, new officers.
Mhm.
Obviously, the opportunity perhaps the church plant around Cedar Rapids from out of your own church and broader in the Iowa Presbytery. Any other kinds of prayer requests you might have or any parting words for us?
Uh, I would even add details. I Part of the training process for the elders is the an actual exam. And we have a written exam that I got to put together for these men, and I sent it to them on Saturday. And I said, "You got a couple weeks." So they're staring down the line at it,
Mhm.
wondering, "Oh boy!" So praying for them in particular for this exam and the eventual oral exam that's going to follow. It will be a big thing. But yeah, I always ask for prayer. One thing I remember with you, Zach, when I was there for the summer was there was a point halfway through where things were getting busy, things were getting tired, and you kind of like make sure you rest. And you would go into your study and you'd put on a show at like 9 or 10 o'clock, and you'd grab a drink and you kind of go, I just need to rest. I need to take a moment. And at the time, I'm like, what do you mean? I got plenty of energy. I can keep going. I can keep going. And now I'm been burning candles at both ends and kind of wondering when am I going to rest? I got to rest. And I have a 2 week vacation coming up in just about 10 days. And so there's a thankfulness for that, for the apprentice that can help fill the pulpit, but also uh, I know that is an idol for me to just work and work and work, to pray against it. Trust in the Lord that I don't need to be the one to do it. It's Him who is working in His church. So I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us, Isaac. It's been good to catch up. We've had a couple phone calls over the past couple of years, and just to kind of catch up a bit here. But nice to join with you here on Zoom video. And thanks to all of our listeners who joined us for this episode of the Cincy Reformed podcast. You can find other episodes at cincyreformed.org. Check out the two churches that sponsor this: Ascension Reformed Church at ascensionreformed.org, and also Christ Reformed Church in Northern Kentucky, which is the church plant that Pastor Brandon serves. We'll be coming to you in the next couple of weeks with some episodes with Pastor Brandon and I together. And we're looking forward to those conversations. But until next time, again, thanks again to Isaac and to you all for listening. Have a great week. Bye-bye.